Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session of South by Southwest. My name is Elizabeth Colbert. I'm a staff writer for The New Yorker. I'm the author of a couple books, The Sixth Extinction, and most recently, Under a White Sky, The Nature of the Future. I visited Samsø in 2008 for a piece that became titled The Island in the Wind. And I will be speaking today with Søren Hermansen, who is from Denmark and became the driving force and the local leader of his island's energy transition to renewable energy. Apart from a superhero on Samsø, he was also named Hero of the Environment by Time magazine in 2008. In 2009, he received the Göteborg Award, the environmental equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize, and in 2011, the Sven Auken Award for Environmental Leadership. And we are going to be talking today about how the island of Samsø transformed itself into a net zero community and is now working to become a fossil fuel free community. Hi there, Søren, how are you?
I'm good. Yes, thank you very much, and good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we can start by just describing Samsø to us, because not that many people have visited it or know where it is.
No, but Samsø is an island in Denmark, and Denmark is on the top of Germany, just under Sweden and Norway, so in Kattegat, which is in Skagerrak, between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. So Denmark is a little patch of land in the middle of their little kingdom, and a democracy. So we have a peaceful relation with the king. But in the very center of that little kingdom, we have Samsø. I mean, physically, it is right in the center of Denmark. We have an island with an hour by ferry to west and an hour by ferry to the east also. So we are kind of in the middle of the seas around it. Samsø is one of several, more than 20, almost 30 inhabited islands in Denmark. And we are an own municipality, and we are a little community that is kind of struggling to survive at the same time as we are trying to invent ourselves all the time to stay in the game and be something. And the background for us to know each other is kind of an old story that started in 1998, where we won a competition to be the Danish renewable energy island and to fulfill an ambition from our then Minister of the Environment to be this 100% renewable energy island, demonstrating that we were able to make this transition in Denmark.
Okay, well, we're going to get there, Søren, but tell us.
Yeah.
So what do people do in Samsø? How many are they, and what do they do?
So Samsø is a little community of a little bit less than 4,000 people. We used to be more, so we've had a depopulation like many other remote areas in the world. It's difficult to keep the young people there, but because they don't all want to be farmers or teachers or plumbers and carpenters, we don't have a lot of academic jobs. So if people go away and they get an education at the university, it's hard to get a relevant job back on the island. So we struggle to keep kind of the island alive because it's mainly primary production. We don't have a lot of fishing, still quite good at farming. We are a tourist destination. We have a very thriving and good tourist business in the summertime because we have nice beaches and nice nature. So it's a little nice remote place to go.
Okay, so now tell us a little bit about yourself. Before you got involved in this renewable energy project? What were you doing? You grew up on Samsø, right?
Yeah, I'm born on Samsø. So I'm from a long line of farmers on Samsø. My family came from a farming community, and my father was kind of the first one to kind of rebel a little bit against the tradition of inheriting the family farm and running it. But nevertheless, he became a farmer, but he was always kind of compromising himself and working with other things. He had a lot of dreams about doing something else than walking the line of ancestors. And I had the same feeling when I grew up also. He always told me that I shouldn't be a farmer because there was no future in farming. It was going to be more and more industrialized, and it's going to go to hell with farming, and it would be the end of it. So the other way around, I studied other things. I wanted to be a biologist. I wanted to kind of go with nature and study the oceans, and I'd be the next Jacques Cousteau. I was a really big fan of Calypso and the voyages around the world. So I had this really beautiful connection to nature. At the same time, I was realistic about the possibilities of staying on the island. So I left for a while to go to high school and study and travel the world, and then eventually came back. So I was one of the few that came back for several different reasons, and actually took over the family farm and ran the farm for a couple of years, and then realized I had to do something else. But that was kind of my history. I never expected to come back, but I was this little chance, this little hook that kind of kept sitting in my in my forehead and dragging me back to this little island.
So tell us about how this project did get off the ground. It was initially a contest, right?
So it actually has two entrances. One is that we in Denmark, we realized in the 70s that we were depending so much on imported fuel from outside. I mean, everybody experienced the oil crisis in the beginning of the 70s. It was kind of the global oil crisis, and it had many different responses in different parts of the world. Some started digging for drilling for oil or gas and other things to be self-sufficient. And other countries like Denmark, we did both. We both tried to find oil in the North Sea, and at the same time, we started an industrial kind of turnover from kind of traditional production, heavy industry, to a more advanced green technology. And we started producing wind turbines. We had state subsidies to help the green transition and work on being independent from imported fuel from outside. Because our economy was vulnerable to kind of the fluctuating energy prices from the global oil market. And that was it started a transition in the 70s. We both had a discussion about going into the nuclear way, have nuclear power, and also should we kind of have a full transition to green energy. And of course, that was a fight between industry and the hippies in the world who wanted kind of have the more green way of it. And I think the green policy worked because it was a decentralized structure. It talked to the Danish soul, it has a very decentralized structure because we are a nation of many little nations, islands and remote areas and stuff like that. Even being a small country, I think we have this feeling of being independent. I don't know, somebody call it the Viking leadership feeling that everybody is a chief in his own little area. And I think it is also like a trust thing where we trust each other doing the best they can to work with their own places and have treaties with their neighbors. So in that respect, I think the decentralized green energy was good for Denmark. We could see that in front of us. So in the late 90s, when the COP meetings started, they started in 92 with Rio, and they grew, and in 1996 or 7, it was a Kyoto protocol, and my minister, he went to Kyoto and he promised there that Denmark would cut down 21% of the present CO2 emission, which was quite brave. And he did that alongside with Sweden and Germany. So that was kind of the first time the COP meetings, they had a binding contract where somebody said, we will do this. And then when he came back from Kyoto, I mean, industry was not quite happy about this guy who on behalf of Denmark said that we would go this way. But I think today, if we look back in retro perspective, I think they liked it because it kick-started a green innovation in Denmark that is now leading us to be one of the big manufacturers of wind turbines and heat pumps and other things here also. But that's kind of today. So historically, we could say it started with a political vision and at a possibility to have this market opening for Denmark, saying that we can do this. We can be the green leader of innovation. But he also promised that he would find a place in Denmark to prove his case and say, we can actually do it in practice also in full scale. So he sent out this competition where the conditions of the competition was to produce a master plan indicating how we in 10 years would convert to 100% renewable energy. And we, which is Samsø, the community here, the municipality and the business guys and the people of Samsø, send in this proposal, and we won the competition and then became the Danish energy island, which was a little bit surprising for most people on the island, but that was the start of the process.
So what did winning this competition, what happened next? I mean, you won it's like you won, now what, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, now what? Most people didn't know about it. That's the interesting thing. They just thought that that's something from the capital, something from Copenhagen, which is like far away in the mindset. not far away in distance in Denmark. Nothing is far away from anything in Denmark, but culturally, it's totally city and academic to say that we will make this transition to 100%. When you have a farming community where practitioners are working with real-time cases where they say, let's see the money, let's see the cases work for us and so far and so forth. Because what we then had to do was to translate this kind of overall ambition to kind of a drop-down menu of practices. So what's in it for the farmer, what's in it for the plumber, for the carpenter, for the house owner, for wind turbine people, and for other people here also, and start looking at this as a possibility to change the pattern or the destiny a small community was in. And just as a comment, maybe one of the successes for this is also we were in a crisis in the late 90s because we had a big arbitrary slaughterhouse where we had 100 direct employees. It was meant to close because the farming association and the slaughterhouse association, they actually pointed it out to be closed and rationalized and moved to the mainland. It was much more efficient to have a big factory than many small factories, which I disagree with, but that's my point of view. But that was the kind of the destiny of this also. And we could see in a community, if we lose 100 jobs, that's a big loss. It will be a depression on this little island. And if you have then these two projects at the same time, like this very negative, depressing perspective of a closed factory with a lot of unemployed people, and then the opportunity of making a new progressive employment project where we'd actually make a transition that would take a lot of hands and need a lot of investments and changes here also. All of a sudden, this became a solution to the depression. So it was not just saving the world and saving the climate and the environment, it was also saving ourselves and the jobs and the people who lived there. And that gave people like me a golden opportunity to talk to people with a very direct intention and say, this is possible, let's look at it. And people were much more ready to see this as an opportunity of having a life and keeping kind of a job.
So tell us about how, I mean, you became the director of this. How and what does one do? How does one even begin? I mean, you had I guess you had a plan that had originally won the competition, but I don't even remember how detailed was that?
Oh, the plan was very detailed. I mean, it won the competition because it was very detailed and very accurate in the numbers. We saw on one side what was the consumption pattern on Samsø on heating, electricity, transportation, and energy efficiency and savings. And on the other side, the possible production capacity in biomass and wind power and solar energy and all the technologies available on the market. When we then kind of merge these two factors on top of each other, then the plan would kind of materialize in front of your eyes in solutions. And that was kind of the beauty of the project, that you could see this being possible by resources we already had on the island. And instead of importing expensive oil from outside to a fluctuating market price, we were now deciding contracts with our neighbors, buying the straw from the farmers and putting up installations we bought from plumbers and suppliers of this also. So we could actually make a long-term economy we could control, and which was a really, really cool thing. But I think the setup was that we were both like an engineering planning structure, which is not me because I'm not an engineer at all. But we had my colleague at that time, he was really good with numbers. So he could make accurate calculations and present that to people so they could see real time a business case. Where I was kind of more meant to talk to people and organize local communities. I mean, Samsø is a small community, but still we have many little communities here also, and try to organize them in collectives, in cooperative ownership models for wind turbines and district heating and other things here. So people could see a kind of a what's in it for me element in it. So when they invested their savings in the project, they could see that they could actually kind of generate an income from this instead of having a yearly expense on energy consumption. They could kind of both cover their own consumption and on top of that have a little profit in producing energy and selling it to other people. So that became kind of the very pragmatic attitude to change, which I think was the role of me and other people who worked in the organization in the beginning.
And so you would just go around community by community, sitting down and talking to people one by one? How did this work? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it had two phases. One was like the different, what's in it for me on a personal level. This was, I mean, my background in a community was telling me that this was necessary to build up a trust and a collective we. So we could say that we are in this together. So this is inside the community. But I also kind of really quickly learned that if we are only doing it for ourselves, then we will become a lesser important model or an example of change here also. So very soon I learned it was very important to tell this story also. So we started having communication people around us also, and including them in the narrative of change, and starting talking about if we take this into our own hands and start doing things here also, it'll be a story of change in a positive direction, where you have a lot of little communities that has the opposite story, that the story of declining economy and migrating people and all these sort of very sad stories about little communities that wants to be, but they can't keep it. Where we started telling about, we are now in a position of growing. We grow both in minds and spirits, but we also grow in numbers and economy. And I mean, the first time I met you, which I think was very interesting, you came very early in the process, because I don't know, you probably heard about this somewhere.
Yes, I read about it. I read about some other American journalists. The way journalists do things is they just basically borrow from other journalists. So I had read about it.
Yeah, but this was one part of my lessons from my childhood, was that we have to kind of build up a narrative that is strong enough to carry the story out of Samsø, out of the island, to the parliament, to the European Parliament, to the global community. And when they start talking about it out there, with the really great help of people like you, where you write articles about it in famous magazines, then it'll return to the parliament. And my minister will then think, hey, Samsø is doing really good because they are exposed in global magazines, and people are writing about it in a perspective of a larger, what do you call it, the frame, than just the island itself or just Denmark itself, but Denmark in the world being represented by just a little project. It doesn't matter so much. So having the story told out there became kind of the argument in here, which I think is really important, that we were really early out with the story. I mean, very early we had Japanese visitors. That was really funny. They came to Samsø to study the project. We hadn't even started yet.
Well, I remember when I was in Samsø, by which point you had already made very significant progress, but you did reflect back on the early years, and other people told me the same thing, that people in Samsø, they're not particularly cutting edge, they're very conservative farmers. So I think it would be very useful if you could talk a little bit about, your conversations with some of these old guys who, had been doing things a certain way, and how do you convince them, well, let's do things totally differently.
I mean, if you look at it today, and you look at, I mean, you just had an election campaign in America, and then you can see it's either the one side or the other side. It becomes very two-sided and very, very, what do you call it?
Polarized.
Yeah, very polarized. And it would also be very polarized if you didn't kind of bring it. I mean, you had to dig a little bit deeper and find kind of this common ground where you can find the good reason for everyone to be connected to the project. So you could say we create a little platform we call the economy, or the economy of the commons, which is an old traditional economical philosophy in a decentralized community, where you have many actors, but they are depending on each other. It's not the stock market, it's not kind of the traditional banking system here also, but it's kind of a shared ground where you share the capital of nature, because you need it. You have access to grassland, access to water, access to firewood, fishing, whatever. And in a community, it's vital for everybody to be connected to this common ground. So we kind of tried to make a modern version of the commons in the local community. So we made it impossible to have this polarized black and white discussion about things here also, but have a common access to this, to the subject from different positions. And then see, okay, if it's good for me, it might also be good for the other guys. I don't have to mind that and care about it, because they can care about their own situation here. But if we share this ground, it will grow. So the platform will grow. If I feed something into it and I get something out of it, it will grow naturally. And there will be jobs for the carpenter and the plumber, and the farmer can supply biomass for the heating systems. And everybody will get a piece of the cake, because it's a growing economy when we start controlling it ourselves here also. And this kind of leaves this black and white conversation about, is climate change for real, or is it not man-made, or all these ridiculous discussions, in my point of view, that is happening now still. We didn't have them, because it was not about the climate at all. It was about us doing the right thing with the tools we had in hand.
So talk about a little bit about. I mean, I think it's really important to understand, like, how did you do it? I mean, now you got to the point where Samsø is producing, as much renewable energy as it uses. So, what we would describe as carbon neutral. How did you get to that point? What are the big projects you took on, and talk a little bit about? I mean, you kind of make it sound easy, sir, but it couldn't have been easy.
No, it was not easy at all. I mean, it was very complicated. So this was maybe also one of our lessons learned quite early in the process. When we described the whole project, people kind of said, no, stop. This is, I mean, are you crazy? This will be so expensive and so complicated. We can't do this. So we quickly learned that the only way to do this was to break it down in eatable pieces. I mean, somebody says, if you want to eat an elephant, you have to take it bite by bite. And I think the same thing happened here also when we started breaking it down into kind of some wind projects, some heating projects, some transportation projects, some houses insulation and energy conservation. Then it became more easy to people to see, where do I fit in? What's my interest in this also, and how do I organize? And because we have this cooperative organizational structure, which is also my father's generation and his father's generation, they helped each other doing dairy factories and slaughterhouses and mills and other things here also, where 10, 20, 30, 50 farmers, they got together and they put a little finance in it, and they got it up and running because they needed it. And if they helped each other, they would have these services in hand in their neighborhood. So we used the same kind of legal structure to organize wind cooperatives and district heating cooperatives, and organize it kind of on the blueprint from the office that we then worked from. So we created kind of an agency that helped people go from project idea to realization, which is the difficult part. I mean, all the paperwork, the applications, the permissions, and all the things here also. So having this as a secretariat, which was like, we found some money from the Danish government and from the European Union and other places, so we could actually have a salary for people, for staff, 1 or 2 persons that would help these processes. That was vital for the transition, because people would then accept it. If they had the numbers and the details in the project, it was easier for the farmers to say to them, okay, I'll buy a share, and the house owner, I will buy a share. So we then made these wind cooperatives and district heating cooperatives, which could be 300 houses or 500 houses in a collective in a nearby neighborhood, where people could see the benefit of having a central boiler instead of each house had their own boiler system. So the argument for people was a financial structure. If it's cheaper for me to be part of a cooperative, then the convincing argument is not so difficult to find. It's just a trust thing, that you have to trust the organizational structure to actually be honest about the numbers. So you're not being fooled and tricked by a market driver thing. So when you share the responsibility and you elect your own steering committee, then it becomes easier to understand how it works. So
tell us what were the big projects? I mean, I know there's one really big offshore wind, right? That's the real big one, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, now seen in the global wind development, it's not so big anymore, but it was one of the biggest in the world when we made them in 2003, 2004. It was groundbreaking. Also, we made monopiles offshore in 20 meters depth, which was very unusual and one of the first. So we were groundbreaking then also, and making a quite risky project. But we were so lucky to have a government that kind of supported this, not directly with funding, but they gave a state guarantee for the production from the wind turbines. So when we then set up a budget for this also, for people to buy a share, they could buy 1 share or 5 shares or 30 shares in this. And 1 share was about $300. So that was kind of affordable for most people to buy a share in this also. So most people would buy 5 shares, which was then equivalent to 5,000 kilowatt hours per year, which was a household's consumption. So everybody could then say, I'm self-supplied with energy, and they would have actually on top of that have a profit margin on their investment that would pay back this investment in 7, 8, 9 years or something.
But unpack that a little bit. That's because there was a guaranteed rate that the utility would pay when they took the power. How did that work?
It was a combination of the utility and the state, because the state has this ambition about decommissioning the big central coal-fired power stations. I mean, Denmark was fed by coal and then gas a little bit later, but in the zeros from 2000 up to 2010 or something like that, we still had a significant amount of coal and natural gas in the power system. So the big electricity companies, they use coal here also. But in the transition to green energy and the decentralized structure, the government told the utilities to feed kind of all production from green energy a guaranteed minimum price, and the guarantee was from the state. So they kind of had like a security net under the market. So we controlled the energy market. It was a very social arrangement that helped this process and helped people feel safe about their investment.
But as I understand it, then after a certain number of years, a new government came in, right? And that price support was over.
Yeah, it was actually meant to be, you could say it happened maybe a little bit faster than anticipated, because we had a change of government from a social democracy government to a more liberal government. And they said, we need to get electricity production over on the free market conditions. And that was the end of a state guarantee for the prices here also. But the contracts that was made up to the change of government was 10-year contracts. So they couldn't stop these contracts. So even after the new government was in, if you had signed a contract the year before the election, it would still be valid 10 more years.
Got it.
Which was then good. So you were on safe ground here. Making a new contract would then make you on the market conditions. You could say, seen in retrospective, the intention was to help the market and the wind turbines grow so they could be competitive with the cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour from a coal-fired power station. And they are today. Now they outmaneuver coal-fired energy. So wind power is cheaper now than it is to produce it from coal. So that was the intention, but it needed a lot of state help in the beginning to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, because that's one of the big questions, it seems like, going forward, and for any community that is interested in trying to, emulate Samsø is what sort of policies, either on a state level. Now in the US, we have most climate policy is going to be made, or energy policy is going to be made on the state level, or potentially the federal level. What do you think some of the most important tools are that you had, that the government provided you with, were there some that you could not have done without? Like, this price support seems pretty important.
The price support was really important, because you could say, if you are a personal investor, like a private person, and you're not really willing to invest in risky businesses, then you help a lot of private money to go into this investment if you make this guarantee. So that is a willing democratic government that wants to do that in Denmark, and the intention was to help the market grow. So we had this kind of ambition that we would be a world leader in green innovation. And I think if you interview many of the company leaders today, like Vestas, the wind company, and some of the other companies here also, they have been pretty happy about this also. Even probably if their managers or leaders would say, we don't like state subsidies, I think they would still say it has been a groundbreaking condition for Danish industry that the government helped the progress of innovation in the technology area of wind power, solar energy, boilers and heat pumps, and all kind of other technologies. So in any case, I think you probably also had the same with the car industry and other industries in America, that sometimes you need to help industry to grow because it's kind of a crisis in the system because of many different things here also. So you don't kind of experience the rust belt to happen, or like a decline in industry. Because we realized, because of high salaries in the Danish system, that we exported most of the heavy industry. we were leading in building container ships and big ships also in Denmark, but that all moved in the 70s and 80s to China and Korea and other places also, and we had to replace that with something else, which was then kind of more advanced technology in the green transition. So it was not just to help little islands like Samsø, the government did this. It was like a national movement towards the next paradigm of industry and job creation. And
And
then we could then benefit from this in the local communities.
yeah, talk a little bit about district heating, which is something for listeners in the US, very unusual. District heating is not something that we have very often, but it was a
No, it
big part of
happens.
your.
Yeah, I visited MIT some years ago, and they were very proud to say that down the street, somewhere 2 blocks away from MIT, there was like a very old steam engine producing hot water for MIT, which is quite old technology. I'm not to blame anyone from this also, but I mean Denmark was light years ahead of that in this transition, making little decentralized boilers, having underground piping system to all the houses, and then a heat exchanger there. So instead of having individual heating systems in every house, we connected houses with an underground pipe system where we circulated hot water, and people could tap this hot water and use it for showers and space heating and other things here also. And this gave a lot of savings in particles and pollution and emissions, carbon dioxide from the chimneys. And it also was more efficient because you could then use either waste incineration or biomass and straw and other things here also. Now we're looking much more into heat pumps, but it was a great way to move from oil or natural gas to a more renewable energy fuel source for Denmark, which was really, really good. And I think as an example for you also, I visited many years ago in Kansas, a town called Greensburg. And Greensburg was then devastated by a tornado that kind of just ran over and smashed Greensburg totally. And it was like not so long after Katrina. So there's a lot of aid and help and funding going into Greensburg because everybody wants to help these poor people that had that town totally demolished by this terrible hurricane. And then I visited them and I was looking, it was surrounded by wheat fields. And I saw a lot of big guys with John Deere caps, and I could see there was a lot of wheat straw lying out there in the fields after they harvested this. And I said to them, what do you do with all this straw? Oh, we either burn it or plow it into the ground or make it disappear somewhere. So I said, couldn't you bale this and maybe feed it into a boiler and then heat all of Greensburg with the straw that surrounds this town here? Yeah, we can do that. I mean, it was quite simple to understand this paradigm because it's just like a very simple boiler where you stuff some straw into and produce some hot water and circulate it. But then again, the talk of the town was that the old timers of Greensburg, they hated the idea about changing the system they knew about, which was a gas stove, a little cozy thing that was sitting inside your own house, and then depending on the supply from a system outside. So the mindset had to be changed also, and people had to think about why don't we just use the resources just outside our windows instead of importing fuel from far away? So it's also kind of a mental shift of thinking in this also, and I think that is again the Danish cooperative understanding of that cooperative or a group can do more than an individual if you work together. So that's
Yeah,
kind of the district heating's purpose. It is that if you group a number of houses within the reach of a pump, then you can be a member, which is, I
yeah,
think, it's a great thing. Yeah.
yeah. So talk a little bit about, I mean, communities, many communities, before COVID, lots of people were coming from all around the world to the Energy Academy to try to find out, the secret recipe. What about, so you guys have a lot of wind, that's a, fantastic a resource. What about communities that just don't, they just don't have a lot of wind? What are some of the other options, for becoming a renewable, going net zero, which, we're all supposed to be working towards?
Yeah, I think that is, I mean, you're right. We are in a windy area. So the northern part of the hemisphere, all around the circles of the globe in that same kind of level or latitude, we have a lot of wind. And we are harvesting this wind to the benefit of the electricity consumption, and especially if we live in an area like we do, where we have Sweden and Norway with hydro dams and other things. So all of a sudden, wind become kind of a constant source, and we can store it in hydro dams and let it run again when there's no wind. I mean, solar energy now is so advanced that you can actually make so much more energy, and the cost of one unit of solar panels has gone down so much that it's now profitable to also to have a lot of solar in your system. But I think what we have learned is that you have to make yourself aware of the mix of fuels you can use to fulfill your energy needs. So the combination is more interesting than what you have plentiful. I mean, we have a lot of wind here. We can't harvest it all. We can't just put up more wind turbines because the system will be wobbly if we add too much wind power in the system. We have to have combinations of what do you call it, supplementary energy production that will then help each other to be constant, and we can balance the system, because everybody wants to have constant and high quality electricity for their very sensitive computers and appliances in their houses here also. And the Danish Energy Administration has managed to do that. And I think when you see at new technologies and smart energy systems and battery storage and stuff like that, we are growing in that direction, that you can do that almost everywhere.
Tell us what didn't work. What did you guys try that didn't work? So maybe people can avoid that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course there were things that didn't work. I mean, it was not all of the wind projects that worked. Some places people would say, no, we cannot have wind turbines in this beautiful area. It's too close to the nature area, or too close to the church or something like that. We had all kind of arguments here also. So you could say that we battled and we discussed and debated a long time about things here also, because people didn't agree on everything. So it's a good question, very relevant question. We are not just one harmonic community that agrees on everything. I mean, people argue a lot here and fight for their rights and their things here. And we have a very high, what do you call it, level of quality nature. This is also why we're a tourist destination. A lot of people come from outside to enjoy our beautiful beaches and the nature and the migrating birds area and all these sort of things. And of course, we have this kind of controversial balance here also. We need much electricity, we need a lot of energy, but at the same time, we want to protect the neighborhood and the area here. So the debate and the struggle was how much can we intrude and use the areas to produce energy, and how much distance should we keep to valuable nature areas. That was one of the discussions we had here, and a very healthy discussion, because we didn't ruin the environment with ugly structures and bad planning. So I think we like the way things are today, because we worked a lot finding the right positions for the wind turbines so they wouldn't disturb whatever interest that was here in it also. But when you talk about failures, when we don't have so many electric cars and hydrogen cars yet, it's because 20 years ago when we started, technology was not there at all. We didn't have we didn't have reliable electric vehicles. They couldn't drive more than, I don't know, 10 miles or something. It was really bad. And there was no charging stations. There was no infrastructure ready here also. So we also learned we cannot do rocket science in a local community. People don't trust that. It has to work from day one. Not too many experiments. It has to replace something we like with something that is maybe better or just as good. Otherwise, people will be angry and upset about it. So if you go down in life quality and it becomes more complicated and difficult to live here, people will kind of dislike it really quickly, or maybe not even approve the project and use it. And one other thing that didn't work was we bought not so many years ago, we bought a new ferry, because we're depending on ferries to the mainland. And of course, the ferries are very hungry diesel engines, and we want to replace that with a hybrid engine using gas, and then produce an electricity for the thrusters or the propellers that is driving the ship. And we would produce this gas from manure and waste, organic waste and other things here also. I mean, that was a beautiful idea, but the problem was we couldn't meet the market price, because Europe is flooded by cheap gas from Russia and other places, which is one of the contradictions here. We might not agree with Putin, but we still like his gas. And he will rev down, he will lower the price, so he will meet the competitive price for existing price structures in Europe, which is a political, I mean, he's showing his power. And this means that we cannot produce biogas at a competitive market price with this also. So when we are now talking about making a system that is better, it will not be better in economy. And then we have a problem, because people don't like that. If it's very much more expensive than the existing structure here, we'll have a lot of people say to them, this is not making sense now. If we can buy cheap gas, we should do that. And you can disagree with it, but this is the conditions that we have to work with. So we fail when the economy is too much away from the existing structure, and that's a problem. I think you probably recognize that in America as well.
Yeah. So people have come from all around the world. You've traveled all around the world. Tell us about some, inspiring examples of communities that have tried to take on this challenge, and maybe, from you're not as obviously intimately familiar with those, but maybe, some tips, because I really think a lot of people who are listening to this are interested in what they can do in their own communities.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of different levels here also, and I think it's about studying your own, what do you call it, your own challenge in your own community. What is the greatest challenge you can see in front of you, and then kind of backcast that and say to them, what can we do about this? And very often it goes down to economy or energy supply or kind of a job creation or whatever you need in your local community. And then look at energy, because I think energy is key to this also. Energy is an economy. And if you then look at solutions to a present problem that you are discussing in your local community, instead of introducing this as a climate savior, then a lot of people will get off this immediately. Then they don't want to go into this discussion. But if you have a relevant question, everybody is concerned and know about in your local community, you can address and then say to them, what can we do about it, as an open question, and then say, maybe should we look at the energy economy here and see how we can change this. And a couple of good examples. I had a contact from Vinyl Haven and North Haven in Maine some years ago, and a guy who used to be a professor at Harvard University in in financing and economy. He brought a group of people from these islands, Vinyl Haven, North Haven, a group of lobstermen, to Samsø. And they stayed there for a while because he said, we want to learn how to make a cooperative wind project, because we have freezing and cooling facilities, pumping facilities in this island. We have a weak grid, and we want to be more independent from the energy infrastructure from mainland Maine, which is poor and not very developed. And we fear that one day it will be inconsistent, and our lobsters will die, and we'll be in trouble, because lobster fishing was going up these days. And they were in business, these guys. You could feel that they were now growing after a long period with a poor lobster fishing. They had that now under control, and they were doing good. And they were very ready to talk about this. You could feel that they wanted to do it, but they didn't have the tools to do it. But he helped them organize this. So today we have 3 wind turbines on what is called the Fox Island Wind, which is 2 or 3 islands that go together. And the Fox Islands have this wind project, to the great disappointment of many, holiday residents on the island, with people from Boston and New York who had their summer houses there. They hated this idea. But the locals, they liked it, because it served their own purpose, and it helped them get out of the worry about consistent supplies from the mainland and all these sort of things. And I think that is a beautiful project, that even in a community where you don't have this culture and you don't have the feed-in tariff, they could still make a financial or viable project for themselves, because they defined this as a solution to another problem. And I think that is the way to go when you define what is at stake here, and then see what is in your toolbox you can handle locally. And then a decentralized energy is so beautiful, because it can scale, and you don't have to copy Samsø. You can make your own version, but you can learn from Samsø, because we have a lot of different situations you can kind of build from and learn from, and bring it over and work it in your own conditions. I think that is beautiful. But there's many other, and they're not similar. If we still stay in America, we had a beautiful. I was speaking once in Iowa, in Fairfield, which is a little town a couple of hours north of Des Moines, and we're driving through cornfields and silos in like this gunshot straight roads, and in the middle of nowhere you see these pagodas with golden little tips of it. So that's a Maravishna meditation center in the middle of the cornfields, and this is central or Midwest of America, and you wouldn't expect things to be there. But that was a group of people that moved out of California, and they found this place here, and they gradually kind of grew and became very successful. They had tens of thousands of visitors every year, and the local community liked them because they were helping societies to survive. They needed their cars to be mended and their kids to go to school, and they had grocery tabs and stuff like that. So they were part of this little community that all of a sudden started growing instead of declining. And they, after the financial crisis in 2008, the Obama administration, they sent out what was then called the stimulus packet. And they received $1 million American as their part of the stimulus packet. And they sat down, the farmers on one side and the meditation hippies on the other side. And they started talking about, how do we spend this $1 million? And the bank guy from the local branch of a bank, he said, why don't you put it in my bank? And they probably said, yeah, you'd like that because you're a bank man. Yeah, but he said, he told them, because I was in a meeting with these guys, and they then said, he then promised that he would keep this 1 million as a guarantee fund for green loans for innovative green projects in Fairfield. And they, I mean, I was there in 2011 or 13, I don't really remember for sure, but then they still didn't touch the 1 million. But they did a lot of very progressive and interesting projects. And you could say, why was that successful? Well, because it served the local purpose of growth and good ideas, and everybody would accept that in the local community because it was about us. They could make this collective we and not discuss if it was a too crazy hippie project or too liberal or too whatever. So it became a pragmatic project that served the purpose. And I think you can find all these models everywhere where you then, I know it sounds like it's small stuff, but it's not always small stuff. It can also be bigger entities that is working with this. I should have been in Fukushima in Japan now March, because it's 10 years ago that the Fukushima power plant exploded because of the tsunami. And right after that, they created what they call the Global Community Power Conference, which was addressing the need of local activity to happen in the shadow of what you call threats from big industry. And of course, this is also a little bit what do you call it, democratic in many ways also. But they felt it on their own private on their own bodies, that they were polluted by what do you call it, radioactive material dropping down on the fields. They couldn't grow anything. They were deported from their farms, and the rice fields was useless for many years here in this also. So what did they do? They formulated a process where they wanted to be 100% self-supplied by renewable energy within 10 years. So that's a 10-year anniversary this March, which is also interesting. And I mean, more or less, I can't brag that we did this, but we were part of this process and used as an example. And we participated in many workshops in little communities in Japan, which I think is also beautiful because it calls something in people that we can do something when we're in trouble. This is kind of a solution, and the narrative helps us believe we can make a change.
We have, hopefully a lot of people talking about change in the US, change of administration, change of direction in the US rejoining Paris, and trying to make progress here in the US. And I guess, that question, that complicated question of, is it going to be a very big, federal mandate? We have a lot going on in different states in terms of renewable energy mandates, but those are usually very much directed towards the utilities. And so I guess, one question is what you would say to folks, because there is this real question of how we're going to get from A to B. We may have very big goals, but actually actualizing them, I don't think people in the US, I don't think in a lot of communities, I don't think people are really engaged, sort of maybe thinking it's going to come from somewhere else. So maybe maybe the last question I should ask you is, what would you say, what do you say to people all across the US in terms of what can be done at a community level?
Well, I think one of the things I've been struggling to kind of find answers to also what is kind of the question I get all around the world when I'm speaking is, how do can you scale Samsø? And I then try to reverse the question again. Can you downgrade or downscale the Paris Declaration? Or can you translate the Paris Declaration into kind of a local context and make the wording of the Paris Declaration your plan or your words or your narrative of change here also? Because otherwise, I think we'll be in trouble, because there's there's a gap between the global talk and the political blah blah, to be a little bit rude, and then the local need for action and economy and conditions you can work with here also. So I think it's time to man up and have many cells of local entities working independently and at the same time in a network of global activity where you help each other at the local level to do what is meant to happen in the global narrative of the Paris Declaration. And I think that is where the communities around the world could kind of claim and ask for a political framework that will help this to happen, because I think that will make a growth. It will have this local element of necessity. And I think this is not there yet. If we can't feel that the water is rising and the temperature is declining and the winters are getting colder and the summers are getting hotter and more dry and stuff like that. I mean, you have a lot of wake-up calls also in America and other places also where it burns like hell in California and many other places, and it's dry like never before. But still, we don't really change our lifestyles. We don't change our patterns and our expectations for the future. And I think this talk has to go from the top level to the local level, so we can realize and look at each other in the eyes and say, we need to change, we need to do this, and we need to look at the options. What is our tools in the toolbox, and start maneuvering into kind of the possible ways of getting around this. And I think we haven't touched upon this because everybody's waiting for the big guys or for the big structure to tell us what to do here, or to make solutions and agree on this. So, I mean, it's a great success that you now have re-signed the Paris Declaration in America. And we in Europe, we love this. We think, yes, okay, now we can go with the process. But from signing the agreement to actually activating it in the local level, it takes a lot of guts, it takes a lot of financing, and it takes a lot of local leadership. And we need to find these leaders and allow them to act on behalf of the central government. And I think this is where we are at in this transition. This translation hasn't just begun yet. And I think this is, I mean, the global network is there, the community power is there, and we want to be in action also, but we need kind of education and training to go into that adventure together.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think that's an inspirational note to end on. So maybe we should thank all of our listeners and urge them to take Søren's message to heart in their own community.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you, Elizabeth.
It's great to see you. Yeah, I hope to get back to
yeah.
one of these days.
You're welcome.